Hey, peace. What's happening, everyone? On I deal with.
Like the rushing of a mighty wind. Like the rushing of a mighty wind.
Or the misunderstanding about what happened during enslavement. People that want to not like Africans say, well, you sold us. They don't go into the nuances of what the fuck happened. Because yes, there were some tribes that worked with the whites to fucking sell their people on.
But it's that part. Let's talk about
that.
It's saying them saying your people. It wasn't like they were giving the colonizers or the enslavers people from their own villages.
That's a family. So they're trying to debunk that Africans sold their own people. So they're considering that you have to be of the village or tribe to be considered their own people. Okay? So they're positioning that if you were sold, you were not of the same tribe or same village, i.e., you're not their people. Okay. So family, we are over in America because we were sold. So that means we're not of their tribe, of their village. Therefore, we're not of their people. But they'll call us African. They'll say our long lost brother. Wait. You can't have it both ways. You just said you didn't sell your own being own tribe, own village. You sold people who are not of the same tribe, same village. Therefore, they're not your own. Therefore, they're different. So you got to make your mind up. Are we not your own or are we your own? And we're not their own. But I'm saying from their own argument, it falls apart because they're confused in their own lie. So to justify the slave trade, they have to say, well, that wasn't their own. Yeah, but that there is us. Hope you're following. The people they sold, they're trying to say they didn't have no attachment to. They were not of the same people. Well, that people is us. You dig, in America. And we're saying, yes, we're not y'all. We are different. And they're saying, no, we're the same. Y'all got to make your mind up.
It wasn't like they were giving the colonizers or the enslavers people from their own villages. It was people that from other villages that they may be in war with, and this happens. And this is not me saying that it's right, obviously, but sometimes it was about the survival of the space that they were in.
Yeah, so the question I want to address today is this issue of Africans sold African Americans into slavery. They sold us. And, I guess I want to see just the validity of that statement and whether or not it holds any water or whether or not there's anything deeper that can be learned from that whole, from that whole history. But ultimately, is it a us versus them, Africans versus African Americans? Did they sell us? And can we label all Africans as being responsible for the slavery that African Americans and other people in the diaspora experienced? So the first question I'm going to ask ChatGPT, because, I understand that we all, African Americans, Caribbean Americans, and British African Brits or Black Brits, all of us in the diaspora pretty much come from the same tribes in Africa. We all descend from the same tribes. And so I think that's understanding that and asking questions about that will help us to understand or better answer the question of, did Africans sell us? Is it a us versus them thing? So the first question I asked ChatGPT is, did competing tribes in Africa sell each other or kidnap each other for Europeans? And it says yes. In some cases, competing African states and groups did capture and sell people to Europeans, but the full picture is more complex and often misunderstood. Below is a clear, historically grounded breakdown. Short answer, yes. Africans sometimes captured rivals during wars and sold captives. Yes, kidnapping occurred in certain regions and periods. No, this was not universal, not race-based, and not initiated by Africans. Europeans created, expanded, racialized, and industrialized the system. What actually happened step by step? 1. Slavery already existed in Africa, but it was different. Before Europeans arrived, slavery existed worldwide, including Africa. It was usually non-racial, limited in scale, often allowed assimilation, marriage, or freedom. It was not chattel slavery, people as inheritable property forever. Number 2, Europeans created massive demand. From the 15th century onward, Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, British, and French traders demanded millions of laborers. Plantation economies in the Americas made slavery permanent, hereditary, racial, and violently enforced. This demand reshaped African politics and warfare. 3. How Africans became involved. Some African rulers and merchants sold war captives from existing conflicts, traded prisoners for firearms, alcohol, textiles, metal goods. Examples often cited include the Kingdom of Dahomey, the Asante Empire, coastal trading states near European forts. Important, these groups did not sell quote-unquote Africans as a race. They sold enemies, criminals, or captives. And that is what I think the ladies in the video were speaking to, that they didn't really see themselves selling themselves. They were selling their enemies. And, you know, in a way, that's a fair representation of what happened, because, you know, Africans today seeing themselves as one people is a new concept. This is a new concept which comes out of the fight against white supremacy. And so, you know, it's pretty clear that when they were selling slaves to the Europeans, they certainly didn't see it as selling themselves. Far from it. Number 4, kidnapping did occur, but context matters. Kidnapping increased after European demand exploded. Some raids were provoked or armed by European traders. Europeans also kidnapped directly, used deception, encouraged wars, paid premiums for captives. Europeans controlled the ships, routes, laws, prices, and destination markets. Number 5, most Africans were victims, not sellers. Key facts: over 90% of Africans never participated in the slave trade. And that is so interesting, because when we accuse Africans of selling, we accuse all Africans. As long as you're an African immigrant, we Black Americans say, y'all sold us into slavery. But 90% of Africans weren't involved. A very small minority of Africans were involved in that slave trade and in selling slaves to Europeans. And that's kind of, you know, even the same on the European front. A very small number of Europeans were also involved, even in owning slaves. A very small number of Europeans owned slaves in America. And so, but regardless of that, we still find it easy to blame all white people for slavery, as if they were all involved. And I think that too is an important piece of information, which can help us keep things in context. So again, over 90% of Africans never participated in the slave trade. Many African societies resisted violently, lost population and stability, and were later colonized by Europe anyway. Even African groups that sold captives were eventually destroyed or colonized. The biggest misconception: Africans sold their own people. This is misleading because there was no unified African identity at the time. Europeans racialized slavery. The transatlantic slave trade was planned, financed, insured, legislated, and enforced by European powers. African involvement was reactive and constrained, not systemic or controlling. Who bears primary responsibility? Historically, Europeans bear responsibility for creating racial chattel slavery, for globalizing it, for making it hereditary and permanent, and for enforcing it through law and violence. African collaborators existed, but collaboration does not equal authorship. So the bottom line, some Africans captured and sold captives. Kidnapping occurred in certain regions, but Africans did not invent racial slavery. Africans did not control the system. Africans were not the main beneficiaries. The Atlantic slave trade was a European-driven system with African participation under pressure, imbalance, and coercion. And I did want to dig a little deeper because there are questions I think that's important to ask, because I think they reveal some broader truths as well that's important to note in this conversation of, did they sell us? Is it a us versus them situation? So I asked a couple of questions, starting with, what tribes did most of the captives in the slave trade come from? And it says most captives taken in the transatlantic slave trade came from specific regions and ethnic groups in West and West Central Africa, not evenly from the entire continent. Below is the clearest historian accepted breakdown. The main regions captives came from: roughly 90% of enslaved Africans shipped to the Americas came from 4 coastal zones: Western Central Africa, the Bight of Biafra, the Bight of Benin, and Senegambia and Upper Guinea. The major ethnic groups most represented: 1. West to Central Africa had the largest share. This region supplied the single largest number of captives. The key groups are the Bakongo, the Mbundu, and the Ovumbundu. And that's in present-day Angola, Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, with approximately 40% of all captives to the Americas. The major destination was Brazil, the Caribbean, and parts of the US. Number 2, the Bight of Biafra is the second largest. This region heavily supplied North America. Key groups were the Igbo, the Ibibio, and the Efik. And that's in southwestern Nigeria or Cameroon, and it's approximately 20% of captives. And the major destinations were the Chesapeake, Carolinas, and Caribbean. Number 3, the Bight of Benin, often associated with Yoruba and Fon peoples. The key groups were the Yoruba, the Fon, and the Yu. And that's in modern Benin, Togo, and southwestern Nigeria, approximately 15% of captives. And the major destination was Brazil, Caribbean, and Louisiana. Number 4 is Senegambia and Upper Guinea, the earliest region, important early on, especially in North America. Key groups are the Wolof, Mandinka, and Fula. And that's in Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea, and approximately 10% of captives. The major destination was the Caribbean and Carolinas. Important classifications, and this is important, ChatGPT says, these were not tribes sold as tribes. Europeans did not buy whole ethnic groups. Captives were individuals, war prisoners, victims of raids, people seized through destabilized conflicts. Africans did not identify as Black Africans. Identity was ethnic, linguistic, and political. Europeans later collapsed these identities into racial categories. Why these groups dominate records: proximity to slave ports, European trading routes, demand preferences, rice growers and iron workers, etc., and warfare intensified by European weapons and incentives. Why this matters, especially for U.S. history, many Black Americans trace ancestry to Igbo, Congo, Yoruba, and Senegambian groups. Cultural survivals. Language, religion, foodways, music align with these regions. The bottom line, most captives came from West Central Africa and the Bight of Biafra. A limited number of ethnic groups are overrepresented. Not all African peoples were involved, and not all regions were equally affected. The slave trade was geographically concentrated, not continent-wide. Did any of these tribes also engage in kidnapping and capturing others? So my next question was, did any of those tribes that were kidnapped, did they also do kidnapping of their own? That's the question I'm asking ChatGPT, and it says yes, some members of several of these ethnic groups did engage in capturing or kidnapping people, but only in specific contexts and never as unified tribal actions. The practice was uneven, situational, and largely driven by European demand, not inherent cultural behavior. Below is the accurate evidence-based breakdown. The big picture first. It says no ethnic group acted as a single unit. Most people in every group were victims, not raiders. Most people in every group were victims, not raiders. Capturing people usually happened through wars, political punishment, and raids triggered by external market demand. Europeans created the incentives, prices, weapons, supply, and transport. And it's important to note and say again that most people in every group were victims. And, I think they may have been victims by others in other groups. Someone in group A was a victim to someone in group B, and then at another time, someone in group B could have been a victim to someone in group A. Group by group reality. West Central Africa, the largest source or region. The Bakongo, not a raiding tribe. Some Congo elites sold war captives, criminals. The Kingdom of Congo repeatedly complained to Portugal about illegal kidnappings. Many Bakongo were kidnapped by rival factions and Europeans. There were more victims than perpetrators. The Mbundo, some factions allied with Portuguese traders, captives taken during wars with rivals. The Mbundo, some factions allied with Portuguese traders. Captives taken during wars with rivals, example Mbangala mercenaries. It was not systematic ethnic kidnapping. Portuguese military campaigns produced huge numbers of captives, and participation was political and coerced, not ethnic tradition. The Bight of Biafra, a major U.S. source. The Igbo, no centralized state or slave-raiding empire. Some kidnappings occurred during internal disputes, debt enforcement, extremely vulnerable due to decentralized villages. Large numbers were kidnapped by coastal brokers, not Igbo elites. Among the most heavily victimized groups. In the Bight of Benin, the Yoruba, some city-states captured war prisoners. They sold captives during periods of civil war. It was not race-based. Many Yoruba were later enslaved themselves during regional collapse. Both perpetrators and victims, depending on time and place. So they were both the perpetrators and the victims. And I think that is the most important point that I'm trying to make here, is that Africans from all tribes or from all groups were both perpetrators and victims. The Fawn, the Kingdom of Dahomey, conducted organized slave trades. There was state-level military participation and still did not sell, quote-unquote, their own people. Dahomey was later militarily crushed and colonized, one of the clearest cases of organized participation, but still European-driven. Senegambia and Upper Guinea, the Mandinka, captured war prisoners, used slavery within pre-existing systems, Kidnapping was not widespread or random. Europeans destabilized long-standing trade networks. The Fula. Enslavement occurred during jihad conflicts, mostly political religious warfare, not a primary Atlantic supplier overall. Many Fulani were later enslaved themselves. What kidnapping actually looked like. Kidnapping increased after European demand exploded and included raids by armed bands, sometimes mercenaries, corrupt local brokers, European finance militias, deception and abduction near trade routes. This was not how African societies functioned before the Atlantic system. Critical correction to common myths. Quote, first myth, quote, Africans sold their own people. There was no African racial identity. People sold were enemies, outsiders, criminals, war captives. The next myth, everyone participated equally. Most Africans never captured anyone. Many societies resisted or avoided slave trading entirely. Who systemized it? Europeans. They set prices, supplied weapons, controlled ships, created racial laws, and turned slavery into hereditary chattel slavery. So the bottom line, some groups and factions did capture others. Participation varied by time, region, and politics. No group escaped victimization. Africans did not invent or control the system. Racial slavery was a European construction. African participation was fragmented and reactive. European control was systemic and global. All right, so, the main takeaway from me is the understanding that the groups that were being sold were also the groups that were doing the selling. There wasn't one group doing all the selling and one group being the only ones being sold. They all engaged in selling each other. And I think that's where the idea of selling themselves come from. Group A was selling Group B and Group B was selling Group A. So they were all involved. And I'm using the word all kind of loosely, but that's the general idea. So when African Americans, or really anyone in the Black diaspora, when they make the statement that Africans sold us, they should be reminded that someone who was a descendant of chattel slavery here is very likely or can very likely be a descendant of not just a tribe, can be descended from not just an individual from a tribe who was sold, but also can descend from a tribe that did the selling. So one African American may descend to a tribe that sold another African American. So for us to blame Africans, when we're just blaming Africans, we might as well blame ourselves, because so few Africans participated in the trade, where we have no more right to blame an African immigrant and said, you sold us, than we do to blame our fellow African American or fellow Caribbean American, because we all came from tribes that were doing both the selling and being sold. We all belong to both groups of tribes, all of us. So if you want to point the finger, you would have to say we're all responsible. We're all responsible. And I think a responsible understanding of the phrase Africans sold themselves is for all of us to take responsibility for it and stop blaming one another. Because again, the average African is no more responsible for selling anyone than the average African American. They're just not. And so this idea of blaming Africans is just a ridiculous idea, and an idea I think is worth dispelling, because it's just not based in historical facts. It's something constructed to make us, feel better about ourselves and to really not take responsibility. But we can't evade that responsibility, where we're all responsible. Granted that, the main bulk of the responsibility does lie in the hands of Europeans. However, when it comes down to the African participation, we can't blame anyone more than we blame ourselves. And I think that's ultimately the main point that I want to drive through today. But yeah, that's it. That's it for this one. Peace to you for stopping in. It's always a pleasure. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. You done know. We're gonna catch you on the next one. Peace.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them out to one, hygiene a do it. That's why enough of them get rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 bills, you can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep a eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go late. Them never yet plant and not try figure rape. Bigger heads where you fight for the seat. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle was submit. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it low. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah. Everybody just a pre-success. When me looking at the street, you me see enough stress. Them all a fight for who reach up next. Everybody want floss and a beat up chest. Juvenile in a them teen love sex. Them a pre the fast money, them no need subjects. And if you're unfortunate, please don't vex. I saw the thing said cause the streets don't rest.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it low. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah. It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them out to one, hygiene a do it. That's why enough of them get rifle a beat. Everybody want the ghosts and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 bills, you can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep a eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go late. Them never yet plant and not try figure rape. Bigger heads where you fight for the seat. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle was submit. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it low. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah.